I have had the opportunity to do things that did indeed break barriers. I had the opportunity to fly fighters when it was brand new for women to be able to fly fighters. I was the first one to apply to go to weapons school and then graduate from weapons school and be a squadron commander, a wing commander. So all of these were opportunities. I didn't think of them as breaking barriers, but because I was the first female to do some of those things, I effectively did break those barriers. But it was all based on opportunities that the Air Force gave me.
Patriotism is not limited to gender. Throughout the history of the United States, women have always found ways to use their skills to assist in war efforts. As advancements were made in warfare, there was a need for pilots in the military. Though the first woman earned a pilot's license in 1911 and aircrafts were used in World War I, women would not be allowed to use their aviation skill until World War II. World War I brought a need for everyone to participate in war efforts, and women stepped into jobs traditionally held by men in order to free up the men to fight in the war. At the same time, the women's suffrage movement was on the verge of a breakthrough, and the National American Women's Suffrage Association leader, Carrie Chapman Catt, thought full participation by women would be seen as a patriotic demonstration of citizenship. Negative public opinion and hesitant military leaders limited women's roles, but the country needed their skills to pursue the war effort and to move male soldiers out of office jobs and onto the battlefield. When the call came for service in World War II, women's successful participation in World War I was an important precedent for expanding roles of American women in the military and for developing the military establishment's acceptance of women's service in the U.S. Armed Forces. World War II brought a shortage of pilots. As a result, in 1941, Congress authorized an enlisted pilot training program. Candidates had to have a high school diploma and be in the top 50% of the class, with at least 1.5 credits in math, and be between the ages of 18 and 22. And of course, they had to be male. By 1942, the shortage of pilots was so severe, an experimental program was created. Train women to fly military aircraft so male pilots could be released to combat duty overseas. 28 experienced women pilots took on the jobs and formed the country's first female squadron. Between November 1942 and December 1944, 1,074 more women were trained to fly, first in Houston and then moved to Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas. Nancy Love and Jacqueline Cochran founded the two programs, Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron and Women's Flying Training Detachment. These two programs were later combined to form the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, WASPs for short. The WASPs were young women and all volunteers who had a civilian pilot's license. Access to a pilot's license varied, as women either relied on the assistance of their families or would scrape together every dime they had earned to pay for flight hours and certifications.
When I joined, at first they took women who had 250 hours. Well, of course, I didn't have near that. And after I had taken the course, every time I'd get $5, I'd go out and buy 30 minutes worth of flying time or whatever it cost. So by the time the WASP came, I had about 50 hours. So I went into the WASP with about 50 hours. They had lowered their requirement. I think by the time I got in, it was 35 hours.
In addition, women had to pass an Army Air Corps physical and cover the cost of transportation to Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas for basic training. After months of military flight training, 1,102 of the original 25,000 applicants took to the skies as the United States' first women to pilot military aircraft. Though not trained for combat, the WASP flew a total of 60 million miles performing operational flights, ferrying new planes long distances from factories to military bases, and towing aerial targets to give ground and air gunners shooting practice, using live ammunition. The WASP expected to become part of the military during their service. Although they were stationed at U.S. military bases and flew U.S. Army Air Force planes, women Air Force service pilots were classified as civilians. As civilians, the WASP had no insurance, no burial and death benefits, no military rank, and no veterans benefits. By 1943, the Secretary of War, Henry Stinson, had become convinced of the value of the program to the war efforts. In 1944, Representative John Costello of California sponsored House Bill 4219 to commission the Woman Air Force Service pilots as full-fledged military personnel. On June 21, 1944, a bill for the militarization of the WASP was defeated in Congress by 19 votes. The War Department announced that the decision to disband the WASP was based on indications that by the end of the year there would be sufficient male pilots to fill flying assignments. After the program was disbanded, WASP records were sealed, classified, and stored in the government archives. The WASP were expected to walk away from their military service and rejoin civilian life, jobless and unrecognized. WASP were the first women to fly U.S. military aircraft and helped break a barrier that would pave the way for women in the aviation field. The toughness and efficiency of the women who served in the U.S. military during World War II had convinced officials in all branches that it was worth employing women. In 1948, President Truman signed the Women's Armed Services Integration Act into law. The act let women serve as full, permanent members of all of the branches of the military and entitled them to veterans' benefits. But in reality, the act severely restricted their service. It limited the number of women who could serve to 2% of any military branch, and it limited the number of women who could become officers. Most significantly, it prevented women from commanding men or ever serving in combat. 30 years after the WASP were disbanded, the Navy presented Wings of Gold to its first 6 female aviators at Naval Air Station in Corpus Christi, Texas. On February 22, 1974, Rosemary Mariner was among those 6 aviators. When Rosemary Mariner earned her pilot's wings, she was among the first of the women to be certified for propeller aircrafts, but she was still barred from the fighter jet track. But that barrier came down unexpectedly. Mariner's next commanding officer needed more jet pilots and gave her a chance to sign up. She became the Navy's first female tactical fighter jet pilot. She was the first woman to command an operational naval aviation squadron. Mariner retired from the U.S. Navy in 1997 after obtaining the rank of captain and logging 17 carrier arrested landings and more than 3,500 flight hours in 15 different aircrafts. Not only did Captain Mariner lead the way in flight, she was the nation's leading advocate for equal opportunity in the military. In 1992, she worked with members of Congress and a Defense Department advisory board to overturn laws and regulations keeping women from combat. This work eliminated barriers and allowed others to soar into new opportunities. In 1993, Jenny Leavitt became the United States Air Force's first female fighter pilot. When she finished her pilot training in 1992, she was top of her class and was given first choice of an aircraft to fly, as long as it wasn't a fighter, bomber, special operations aircraft, or any other planes that were off limits to women at the time.
I stood up and I asked for the F-15E Strike Eagle, and I was told no. But in my heart, I knew that policy was going to change.
I am today announcing that effective immediately, women pilots and navigators will be able to compete for, train in, and fly any aircraft in the inventory of the United States Air Force.
Major General Leavitt has more than 3,000 flight hours, including more than 300 combat hours over Iraq and Afghanistan. She was the first woman to command a United States Air Force combat fighter wing. The ability to fly has nothing to do with gender. However, it was gender that limited the opportunities of women to use their aviation skills to fight for their country. It took an act of war and shortage of male pilots for women to have the opportunity to demonstrate their aviation ability. Through hard work, dedication, and the willingness to challenge laws and regulations, women were able to break down the barriers that stood between them and their dream of flying for their country.